So, croeso pawb, welcome everyone to this evening's webinar titled Everything You Want to Know About Hedgerows. Yn enw I di Rhys Evans, dwi'n gweithio i'r Rhwydwaith Ffermio a Lles Natur. I'm Rhys Evans. I work for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. For those of you who don't know the network, we're a farmer-led organisation and we champion producing food side by side with looking after nature and the environment. Delighted to be joined this evening by Megan Gimber and Hywel Morgan, who will be talking about hedgerows, their benefits, and yeah, why it's worth planting and managing hedgerows, not only as a farmer, but kind of for wider society as well. And this is a joint event between the Nature Friendly Farming Network and Coed Cadw, the Woodland Trust in Wales, funded by the People's Postcode Lottery. And this webinar is sort of framed in a Welsh context, but I think the principles apply across the UK. So even if you're not from Wales, this is very much relevant if you're interested in hedgerows. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Megan to talk about everything you wanted to know about hedgerows. Over to you, Megan. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rhys. Hi, my name is Megan, and I am, I call myself the hedgerow geek from People's Trust for Endangered Species. So I deal with everything hedge, from farmer-focused management workshops all through the winter months to making resources, educational resources. I run hedgerow surveys. I work along researchers to support hedgerow science. And I've even been known to dabble in a little bit of policy whatnot as and when it is being called for. So I would say looking at hedgerows from a wildlife perspective, to me, it's really clear that they are one of the best habitats on most farms and they punch well above their weight, considering their really modest land use footprint, or at least they can when we manage them well. So as we said, today we're going to be looking at hedgerows, their structure, their benefits, and how we manage them and create them so that they can offer the best they can offer. It's my opinion that their importance to farming, which is of course the reason we have hedges in the first place, because they are an asset to our farming. I think that importance will only grow. We're going to need them both for nature and for farming resilience in the face of climate change. But on an optimistic note, I would say hedges are probably the area where I see the most scope for impressive positive change, both within the potential speed and the extent of change that we can achieve with just a few tweaks to how we approach the management of this impressive habitat. So you just need to climb a hill, of which you are blessed with very many in Wales, or walk about the countryside to see how important hedges are to the Welsh landscape. And that's always been the case. So I'm from Devon, and we have, I would say, fairly similar hedges. We've got banked species, rich hedges in Devon. And I always thought that Devon had the best hedges in the world. I'm very proud of them. And even I'm jealous of the raw material that you're working with here in Wales. Welsh hedges are more species rich than any other home nation. And I would say this is something to be incredibly proud of, something to cherish and something to protect. This species richness is brilliant for wildlife. It benefits wildlife with a longer flowering and fruiting season, and it also makes them more robust in the face of pests, diseases, and climate change. So you're working with some really good stuff from the outset in Wales. So obviously I work for a conservation charity, and one of our main focuses when we're looking at hedgerows is their benefit to wildlife. And hedges are incredible for wildlife. The closer you look at them, the better they get. And I think that the study I will always point to is one done by a chap called Robert Walton, who is the chair of the Devon Hedge Group, and an all-round hedgerow legend, if I'm honest. And he studied one hedge on his farm. He looked at that one hedge, only 85 meters long, and counted 2,070 different species using that hedgerow. And now Robert thinks this is an underestimate, believe it or not. He thinks like the true number of species in that hedge was probably more like 3,000. but some of them, he couldn't identify. And actually, he was just looking at the ones that you could see with the naked eye. So how do they do it? I think this is really important and helps us understand how we can manage hedges in a way that's sensitive to wildlife that's in them. Um, Hedges provide for wildlife in, I would say, three broad ways. Number one, as a physical home. Things physically live and nest and hibernate and overwinter, and just they live in hedges. Number two, as a complementary habitat. So things that might not live in a hedge will still use that hedge. They might use it for food, for shelter, for mate finding, or for hunting, like this barn owl here. And the third thing that they do for wildlife is wildlife corridors. So they help connect up other patches of habitat and allow our species to migrate and move from one piece of habitat to another and across the countryside. And again, this is going to be really important. We know that connecting populations of species is really very valuable and it protects them against isolation. Now, some species use a hedge for one or two of those three ecological roles. Some species use them for all three. So bats is a really good example. Bats will often roost in hedgerow trees, particularly if you've got nice big old hedgerow trees that you might have in some boundary hedges. They feed from the insects that a hedgerow provides, and a hedge provides, a huge biomass of insect life. And they also use them to commute. So even with wings, bats use hedgerows, a bit like we use roads. So they echolocate and use hedgerows to navigate across the countryside. Hedgehogs will also use hedges for all three of those roles. They will feed from the hedge bases and the margins. They will nest and overwinter and hibernate at the base of a hedge. And they like to use linear features to sort of bimble around the countryside. And in a town, that might be a garden fence, but in the countryside, that generally hedges. And these wonderful things, dormice, again, these are another species that use all three of those roles that a hedgerow can provide. So whilst we think of a dormouse as maybe a coppice woodland species, hedgerows are actually fantastic at supporting dormice too, particularly if your hedgerow is in good condition and is a good mixed species hedgerow. The reason that they need a mix of species is that these little fellas go into hibernation over winter. And then when they wake up, they actually need a diversity of food throughout the year. And what they eat changes. So when they wake up out of hibernation, they go for protein-rich things like blackthorn pollen. And then they move on to insects, they move on to fruit, they move on to nuts later in the year. So actually having a broad range of woody species in your hedge really helps support them. They also will live in a hedge, so they'll often build their breeding nests, anecdotally, actually at the trim line, unfortunately, and they'll hibernate down at the base and in the margins. And of course, they also use it for connectivity. These little fellas, we call them arboreal, which basically means they like to travel across branches. And to get from one woodland to another, hedgerows are absolutely vital. So again, making sure that we've got connected populations actually helps protect these species from isolation, and the risk of local extinction. So the reason we think hedges are this good for wildlife, I actually think is a fascinating story. Hedges, they mimic what we call the habitat you get at a woodland edge or a woodland edge ecotone. And that essentially is elements of woodland, elements of flowering scrub, and elements of grazed pasture, which you get at sort of the margins and the bases of the hedges. And this does a bit of a magic trick, really. So for a start, that means hedgerows can provide habitat for things that would normally live in a woodland, flowering scrub, or pasture. But it also provides a habitat together that I would say, is greater than the sum of its parts. And it turns out that there's a huge number of species that actually need all of these elements, an element of woodland, an element of flowering scrub and pasture to fulfill their natural life cycle. In fact, when you look at our native ecology, lots and lots of species actually need all of these different elements represented in one area to really thrive. Now, if you bear with me for a minute, I'll give you what we think is the reason for this. We think that the reason why our native ecology loves this, otherwise fairly bizarre combination of habitats is that it reflects what our nations would have looked like pre-agriculture. So we would have had a huge amount of woodland pre-agriculture, but it wouldn't have been coast to coast closed canopy. We would have actually had a large number of open spaces with scattered trees, lots of scrub, and it would all have been kept dynamic and changing through the actions of large herbivores and megafauna, which would have eaten, browsed, grazed, crashed, crunched their way around the countryside, keeping this wonderfully dynamic habitat. Of open grown trees, scattered trees, flowering scrub, elements of woodland, and elements of grazed pasture. And if you think actually, well, if that's what our ecology by and large adapted to, there wasn't a section of woodland and then an open field with a fence down it like there is now, but actually all of these habitats kind of bled in together. We would have had much more of this wonderful mixture. If that's what our ecology adapted to, it's actually no surprise that when we sort of replicate it in man-made habitats or semi-natural habitats like hedgerows, that actually our nature responds to this really well. And this is exactly what we've done with hedgerows. We've sort of recreated that pre-agricultural habitat, but just squeezed them into narrow corridors. And we have taken away some of the dynamism that keeps a hedgerow special. We've taken away the spatial dynamism. We don't let our hedges romp into the fields because we need the centre of the fields to be productive. And I think it's good to understand that that actually means to keep this habitat in this wonderful special, I call it the Goldilocks zone of succession for wildlife and as a decent asset for us. That means we need to keep our hedgerows dynamic through time. And luckily, this is exactly how we've been managing them pretty much forever. We manage our hedgerows on a life cycle. We allow them to go through their succession. We reset them through hedge laying or coppicing, and then we allow them to go through that successional cycle again. And this is what keeps that wonderful habitat structure and dynamism that actually really is fantastic for wildlife as well as being a fantastic asset for us on our farms. So what do we want of a good hedge? As I've said earlier, a mixed species hedge is fantastic for dormice. It's also fantastic for loads of other things as well. And again, in Wales, you're blessed with fantastic, wonderfully mixed species hedges. The reason they're so good is that every plant within them will flower and fruit at a slightly different time of the year, which means overall they will flower and fruit for longer. It also means every single plant within a hedge will have something that specializes on feeding it on it. So the more plants you have, the more specialists that hedge can support as well. It also potentially will make them more robust in the face of climate change and tree diseases, which I think is going to be really important in the coming years. We also want our hedges a little bit bigger. So for wildlife, this is quite important. Whilst wildlife loves a diversity of hedges, actually, there is evidence to show that on average, slightly bigger hedges provide better for more species in terms of species diversity and abundance. So letting our hedges get slightly bigger. That said, we don't want all of our hedges the same. We do want some small, trimmed, dense hedges and some wonderfully big, wild hedges. And again, a wonderful way of getting this is by managing our hedges on a life cycle. If you manage hedges on a life cycle, you will always have some that you've just laid or rejuvenated, some that are in a trimming cycle, some that have been left to get a bit bigger, and some that you forgot about and maybe should have done something about 10 years ago. So big, wild and woolly. And this is exactly what our wildlife responds to best. What's good for a yellowhammer is not what's good for a turtle dove. And having that diversity of heights, widths, densities and maturities is essentially what best supports wildlife. We want our hedges to connect up other habitat as well. So connectivity is a really important element of their wildlife role. So we need our hedges to connect to themselves and not be gappy. And we also want to be thinking about which other habitats we can use hedges to connect, whether that be small woodlands, coppices, ponds, rivers, making sure that all of these other habitats are connected. Because with the best will in the world, what's inside our fields is often not very conducive for movement for much of our wildlife. Wildlife tends to want to move around the edges and around the hedges instead. We want a good margin to our hedges. Now, this is important for two reasons. Number one, it helps protect the hedgerow itself. It protects the roots and the base of the hedgerow from mechanical damage or from spray damage. But it's also an incredibly important part of the habitat itself. A huge proportion of the wildlife in your hedge will need the margins and the base of the hedge as well. This is where things will overwinter. This is where things will feed or nest or take shelter. It's a hugely important part of it. We also want we want our hedges to be dense all the way down to the base. So we call this the base canopy, essentially. It's a bit of a technical term, but basically we don't want our hedges to be leggy. Now, the two pictures on the left show hedges that have got a bit leggy. That top left one, that top left one was over trimmed. And hedges generally put on branching growth at the place where you trim them. This hedge has obviously just been trimmed at one height for too long, so that's where it's put on all of its branching growth. Over time, that comes at a cost to the branching growth below. The one on the bottom left, that was just fenced on one side and the sheep got to it, have nibbled up. Now, the reason that the density to the base is important is because so much of our wildlife use the bottom of a hedge. Now, some things will use the top, obviously, but a huge proportion of what uses a hedgerow actually needs the bottom, it needs the base, whether that be for cover or shelter or nesting. Plenty of nesting birds that live in hedgerows will only live at the base of a hedge, things like wrens or dunnocks. So actually, it's really important to get that cover, that density, that thickness all the way down to the ground. And of course, trees are another really important part of the hedgerow habitat. Over half of the priority species that live in a hedge need hedgerow trees to be there. They provide things like songposts and territory markers for really important bird behaviours. They provide nesting opportunities. And in a year where we've trimmed the hedgerow below, which obviously takes away quite a lot of the flowering and fruiting material, the hedgerow trees above, especially if you've got a diversity of hedgerow trees, will flower and fruit irrespective of how we're managing the hedge below. We've lost quite a few trees from our hedgerows in previous years. I would highly recommend anyone that's interested in this goes to look at the National Library of Scotland website, where you can see side-by-side images of Ordnance Survey maps from the 1850s and 60s compared to what we are today, just to show you how many hedgerow trees we've lost. We've lost these for many reasons. Dutch elm disease was a big one. We are now losing loads with ash dieback, unfortunately. And of course, we took down a huge number of trees for the war effort, which unfortunately never actually got replaced. Now, using trees, I think, is really important. Hedgerow trees were there to be used. And there's no reason we can't be using hedgerow trees again. But historically, when we took a tree out, we would then make sure that it got replaced. And this is my favourite way of establishing hedgerow trees. This is actually James Robinson from the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And this is him hedge laying with his dad and his son. And he likes to establish hedgerow trees when he lays a hedge. Now, this for me is the best method of doing it. When you lay a hedge, you just leave one or two good stems standing, and hey presto, you've got a hedgerow tree above and a hedgerow down below. And I would say the more trees that we can cram within a productive farming system, so within our hedgerows and making them useful to our farming, potentially the less land we might have to remove from food production to reach our carbon and biodiversity and habitat goals. So again, putting them in hedgerows to me seems like a no-brainer because it improves the habitat, it can improve the hedgerow functioning. We know hedgerows can contain more, and actually they do it without taking land out of production. So we haven't had hedges for all of these years. We've had hedges for thousands of years. We haven't had them just because of their wildlife. We've actually had them because they've been really beneficial to the way we farm. And that's still true today as it was when they were first established. So I'm going to run through what we think are still some very important benefits that hedgerows provide our farming. There will be other benefits as well, and historically there were plenty more things like, foraged food and firewood and all of that sort of thing. But I'm going to focus on the ones that I think are currently most important to farmed business. So number one, I would say is shade. So in the summer months, heat stress can take a huge toll on livestock. And you'll often see cows and sheep crowding into the shady areas of the field, as you can see in this photo. Now, of course, this is unfortunately only going to get worse with climate change. And the higher the temperatures get for the longer periods of time, the bigger impact that has on our livestock. Now, this will impact things like milk yields, fertility, immune functioning, growth rates. So stuff that's really important for livestock welfare, but also to the profitability of the farms themselves. Shelter. I should really get a picture of some lambs out in a field for this one, really. But shelter again is really important for our livestock, especially in spring when we've got those sort of unexpected spring storms. And when we've got shelter, we know that reduces mortality and exposure deaths, particularly in lambs. And it can give us a little bit more flexibility to how we do our livestock systems. So it might, providing shelter might mean we can outwinter things more readily, or we can outlamb. We've just got a little bit more flexibility with how we manage our livestock when we've got that provided. Browse, I mean, diet diversity. We know cows, sheep, most of our livestock are not just grass-eating creatures. They are browsing creatures, and they will readily eat from a hedge. In fact, turn out cows after the winter, and some are going to go straight to a hedge, even if they've got a field full of fresh, green, lush pasture. This diversity of food is good for them, and we know that there's even evidence to say that to certain degrees, some animals have been seen to self-medicate when they're in pain or have certain ailments. And we know this is going to be more important. So this is from my home county down in Devon. Now, Devon is a bit like Wales in many ways. And in one of those ways, it's normally bright, lush green and quite soggy. Now, my soggy green Devon was not soggy and green this year. It was droughted for the first 6 months of the year. And as you can see, the only green thing left in my countryside was the hedges and the hedgerow trees. So really very important. Unfortunately, it got so bad that by July, we were already feeding the silage meant for winter to our cows in the summer. So again, this is hurting the bottom line of many farm businesses. Now, hedges aren't going to be able to prevent droughts like this, but anything that we can do to buffer and to improve the conditions, when things are marginal, will add to the resilience of our farming. And I think every little scrap of resilience we can build in now will pay dividends. So if you're not a livestock farmer, if you're into crops or vegetable growing, then hedgerows are still very valuable. So mostly through the impact of microclimate regulation. So hedges moderate temperature, they moderate humidity and evapotranspiration near the fields. And they do this basically by providing lots of shelter. And the shelter they provide basically slows down the wind. This can, have an impact up to 30 times the height of the hedge into the field. And this can slow down the amount of water that's lost from our soil and that's lost from our plants. It creates a humidity layer above the crops. And again, that will further reduce the amount of evapotranspiration. And again, this is not going to save our crops in a time of severe drought, but in those marginal times, all these little things can add up to the difference between a crop success and a failure. Hedges provide pollinators. Pollinators don't live in cropped land, they live in uncropped land, so the edges, the hedges, the margins, and obviously have a big impact in many of the crops that we produce. Roughly 600 to 700 million pounds a year in added crop value. They also help reduce our pesticide use by increasing the populations of what we call beneficial insects, which are the insects that basically predate or parasitize our crop pests like aphids. So obviously this one here is a ladybird larvae, but things like predatory spiders, ground beetles, parasitic wasps, hoverflies, all sorts of things live in the hedges, will commute out into the fields, eat up crop pests, and then go home again. And I nicked this from the Nature Friendly Farming Network because it's just such a fantastic graph. This shows on the left hand is a column of all the different microhabitats and habitats on a farm. And along the top, that's all of the different predators and parasites that actually we call the beneficial insects that will help control our pests. And I've narrowed it down to hedges, flowering field margins, and tusky grass, just to show you how much hedges can provide in the way of pest control. Now, there was an estimate that said that if we didn't have these natural predators, we would have to increase our pesticide use by 70%, which obviously has both economic and environmental problems. So what else do hedges do? I'll have to rattle through these quickly because I know time is getting on. They can help us reduce soil erosion by basically helping the soil soak up water faster. So they do this in two ways. First of all, they've got the soil quality underneath the hedgerow is fantastic. You can smell it. Probably the geekiest thing I've ever recommended. But if you get a chance and no one's looking, have a sniff of the soil underneath your hedgerows. It's full of carbon, full of life, really good quality soil. And the larger aggregates in that soil will help increase the rate at which water sort of sinks and soaks into the soil. It also works through root trickle, so water follows the path of the hedgerow roots and turns the soil basically into a sponge, storing it there for later use. And again, anything that slows down water flows, slows down that flow of water in a flash flood, also helps reduce soil erosion. So it stops our soil being washed off the surface. Hedges also store carbon, and I won't dwell on this one too long, but this is looking like a really exciting area. We're still doing a lot of research on this, but understanding how hedges store carbon basically can help us understand how we can store more carbon in the hedges that we've got. And at the moment, we know that hedges store carbon in the trees, in the sort of woody biomass structure on the top, in the hedgerow roots, and also in the soil as soil organic carbon below and around the hedgerow themselves. And the most recent research, which has got me very excited, shows that hedgerows can actually, old hedgerows in particular, store more carbon than forest per hectare. Which comes as a bit of a surprise because when you walk into a forest, you can obviously see all the carbon. You see it in the tree trunks and the branches. Whereas with hedges, which is that illustration on the left, so much more carbon is stored in the roots, in the root biomass, and in the soil. And when you add that all together, they store more carbon on average than a forest per hectare. And I think this is a very exciting area of research. I would say this comes as a double-edged sword, though, because for a start, I think this is fantastic. We've got more to gain by planting new hedgerows than we ever thought. When we realise how much, in the long term, how much carbon they will accumulate and store. But it does also come as a bit of a warning. Our old hedges are storing much more carbon than we ever realised. And we know that when those hedgerows are lost, a lot of that carbon is then lost to the atmosphere. So we do need to make sure that we prioritise our old existing hedgerows and make sure that we manage them in a way that keeps them going. But obviously, so that was a long list of things that hedgerows do for farming and for the environment. And I would say not all hedgerows do this at the moment. Some hedgerows are in better shape than others, and their management, they see, has a huge impact on both their capacity to sustain wildlife and their capacity to provide these benefits for farming. Hedges like this hedge this actually is not in Wales at all. This one was down in Kent. It's a bit of a depressing sight, really. This isn't doing anything. This isn't protecting our soil. This isn't providing natural pest control. This isn't storing very much carbon, and it's absolutely no use for wildlife. I am a relentless optimist, though, and when I look at this, I see opportunity for improvement because the land that this hedgerow once occupied is not being used for anything else. we can turn this hedge back into something which at the moment is pretty much just a relict, really. We can turn this back into something that's living and thriving and actually benefiting us, the environment, and our wildlife. So how are we looking in Wales? What's going on? What's the bigger picture with hedgerows in Wales? Um, in 2007, there was a CEH countryside survey done, and it showed that only 44% of Welsh hedgerows were in good structural condition. Now, unfortunately, this is the lowest number of hedges in good condition of all the home nations. And unfortunately, the picture gets even worse. That dropped to just 7% if we included the margin management. So for me, understanding why they're in this situation is the key to understanding how we can get them back into good shape and get them doing all of those good things for us again. And of course, if you overmanage hedges, they might start to look like the hedge on the left. But if you undermanage hedges, they run up and become tree lines and start to look like the hedge on the right. Now, over time, without change, both of these routes lead to hedgerow decline and ultimately loss. So what is the right balance? How do we manage hedges to make sure they thrive into the future? Now, hedges are living habitats, and to me, they are best managed on a life cycle. And that means we can't manage hedges one way forever. Actually, we need to change the way we manage them throughout their life cycle in order to help them thrive. And this is how we've always managed hedges historically. So again, back to the picture in Wales, I would say what the data says and what we see out in the countryside is actually that we've got both of these pictures in Wales. We do have some wonderful thriving hedges, but we have unfortunately too many like the hedges on the left and the right hand side of this picture. In fact, in that same survey, 66% of hedges sampled were between 1 and 2 meters, indicating that the hedges often get tightly cropped and tightly managed. But on the flip side, we've also seen a significant decline in hedges, a 7.5% loss in total hedge length, particularly in the uplands, actually, where hedges have gone unmanaged, turned into tree lines, and those tree lines over time have got increasingly more gappy until the hedge itself disappears altogether. Now, all of that seems pretty gloomy, and I apologise for the gloominess. Again, I am a relentless optimist, and rather than seeing this as a problem, again, I like to see this as an opportunity. Understanding how we got into the situation we're in is key to understanding how to turn the picture around. And I think to do that, we have to understand a little bit of the history about it. Now, understandable changes to the way we farmed, largely in the period immediately post-war, meant that our hedges, which up until that point had all been managed on this traditional life cycle, where they got laid and maybe trimmed and then let up and laid again. We largely broke with the tradition of laying. For very understandable reasons, we didn't have the labour, the number of people working on farms anymore. And without the laying or coppicing cycles, many hedges have fallen into either the trap of repeated trimming at the same height or seen no management whatsoever, and again turned up into a line of trees that's now becoming more gapping. So farming has obviously changed a huge deal since the war. But I would say the needs of our hedges haven't. And I think what I will show you shortly is how I think we need to be bringing our hedges back into that life cycle management, bringing that rejuvenation cycle back, and making sure that we give a really good future to our hedges. So I'm gonna run through what we think good hedge management looks like, and I'm going to start right from the beginning when you plant a hedgerow. So how do we think you can create a good hedgerow from the whips that you plant? So I think there's 3 fairly decent ways of creating a good hedge and 1 terrible way. I'm going to run through all 4 of those ways. Number 1, plant your whips. Now do this as whatever grant money you might have got to get that hedgerow in the ground to whatever standards they prescribe. That might be 7 whips per metre, it might be 6, depending on where that grant money's come from. I would say then leave them alone and do nothing for 10 years, maybe even 15. let them get their roots in, let them get up tall, and really grow into a nice hedge. And then lay them. Now we call this a maiden lay, and basically it's the first lay that that hedgerow sees. And what that does is it turns that hedge um, into a much more dense hedge, because when we lay a hedge, every single stem we cut right at the bottom, we bend over the top stock and sort of stake or secure that some way. Um, and that starts to grow, creating a wonderful, rich, thick and robust hedge. But the magic that happens when you lay a hedge is what happens at the base where you cut it. Where you make that, we call it a pleaching cut, you get many more stems come up. So you might have started with 6 or 7 whips to the meter, but when you do the first maiden lay, each one of those stems will turn into a multi-stemmed bush right from the bottom, right from the base, where we need that sort of robust thickness to a hedge. And after that, we do something called incremental trimming, which is basically we trim it lightly, just slightly higher and slightly wider every time in order to really bush out that hedge and thicken it up. Now, the reason that incremental trimming is so valuable and so effective is that hedges put on branching growth just below where you trim them. So if we trim them here, they'll put on a layer of branching growth, and then we'll trim them slightly higher. And every place that we trim them, they're going to put on branching growth and really thicken out that hedge nicely. Option 2 is very similar. We plant our hedge, we leave it for a short amount of time, and we might want to coppice it, and then incrementally trim it to really create those layers of branching growth. Now, if you're going to coppice or lay a hedge, you do need to make sure that you protect the stalls from browsing animals, whether it be rabbits or hare or deer, just to make sure that we don't lose that valuable regrowth. And the last option is incrementally trimming our hedges from the start. So planting our hedge and trimming them every year, slightly higher, slightly wider, again, to get those layers of branching growth, to really force our hedges into putting on that structure. This is a hedge that is only 12 years old, believe it or not. It's a beautifully thick, robust, dense hedge. Now, this was established in that first method. It was planted, it was left alone for 10 years, and then it was laid. And this is after its second incremental trim. And to be honest, for a 12-year-old hedge, it's looking absolutely fine. It's looking wonderful. What we don't want to see is hedges that are planted, left to get to the height that we ultimately want them, and then only trimmed there. Again, hedges put on branching growth at the point at which you cut them. So if you only ever cut them at one place, that's where it's going to put on the majority of its branching growth. And we haven't yet forced it into putting that growth lower down. And this means we end up with a hedge that doesn't really have much at the bottom. It's probably still got its spiral guards on. It's only got all its branching and its leafy growth at the top. And, within a matter of 15 or 20 years, it's going to start to look a little bit ropey. That's what we don't want to see. This hedge is also about 12 years old, and unfortunately this one was managed in that last way. You can see it's still got its spiral guards on. It's already missing some stems because the stems have got too stressed out by this management, and some of them have died off already. Now this hedge is recoverable. Don't worry, that we can just let this one up and lay it and it'll be absolutely fine. Hedges are really resilient and robust. But I would say if you've gone to all of the hard work of getting a grant, planting a hedge, and managing it, this isn't likely what you're going to want to see for it after 12 years. So when you do plant a hedge, make sure that you have an idea of how you want to manage it going forward. So once we've got our hedges in the ground, what do we do once we've got an established hedge? Now, firstly, again, they do require management. If we don't manage our hedges, they run up, they turn into a line of trees, they get thin at the bottom, they lose their scrubby, thorny, dense texture at the base, and then they start to die out as well. Now, unfortunately, this is a particular problem in Wales, particularly actually in the uplands. And this is completely understandable. When we stopped laying our hedges, we started trimming them. And trimming slowed down this sort of race to tree line. But you can't take a flail to the uplands. So the hedges in the uplands went through this process an awful lot more quicker. Um, and I think it's important to know that we do actually have to do something to our hedges to keep them as hedges. So anyone that says that managing hedges is unnatural, or we should be leaving them to do their own thing as nature wanted or something, that doesn't apply with hedges. Hedges are a semi-natural habitat and they actually require some management. So understanding how trimming and how management affects a hedge at different stages of its life is really important so that we understand what management best suits which hedges and when. Now, again, as I said earlier, hedges put on branching growth at the point or just below where we cut them. And now this is largely because we're trimming off what we call the apical meristems or the growing tips. Now, any gardener will also know this. You chop off the growing tip of a plant and it puts on much more branching growth. And this is a hormonal impact. We take away the hormone that tells our plants to grow from the sky, and that's also a hormone that's been preventing branching growth lower down. So by taking away the growing tips where those hormones come from, we allow our hedges to properly bush out. And this is something we can utilize to create a fantastic, thick, dense habitat. But unfortunately, we can take it too far. Now, this is a hedge that has just been trimmed for too long and at the same height. And that combination of hedges being trimmed at the same height every year and for too long is what will slowly reduce the quality and the structure of our hedges. Now, this is a hedge. I think this was Northumberland actually, but you can see that's an old pleacher in there. There's a little sort of horizontal stem at the base of a hedge with some vertical bits coming off it. That's a sure sign that this hedge used to be in laying management, but for many, many years, it's just been trimmed at that one height. Now, over time, if it doesn't see a change, you can see the only branching growth is right up at that trim line. That's where all the leaves are. Over time, if the management doesn't change, this is likely what we'd see. Stem by stem, one by one, these will die off and we'll actually lose those. So that's a bit depressing, but I'll quickly move on to how we avoid that. So if cutting them at the same height and cutting them every year together kills hedges, that gives us two really good solutions to not do that, basically. So number one, we can do rotational trimming, which is when we don't cut our hedges every year, but we cut them every 2 or 3 or 4, every 4 years, depending on what machinery we've got. Now, this really helps our hedges flower and fruit as well, largely because our hedges put on fruiting and flowering wood on their second year wood. So if we cut all of our hedges every single year, we're cutting off most of that flowering and fruiting potential. And of course, if they're not flowering, then they won't be fruiting as much because we need the flowers there to create those berries. Our second option is not trimming our hedges at the same height, but actually trimming them slightly higher and slightly wider every time we cut our hedge. Now, this is a technique called incremental trimming. And basically, it does a brilliant job of building branching density into our hedges, again, because everywhere we cut it, will increase branching density, but it'll also allow a band of flowering and fruiting age wood to be left on that hedge every single year, even if we trim those hedges every year. And this is what that can look like in practice. This hedge gets trimmed every single year, but it gets trimmed slightly higher and slightly wider, and you can see the difference it makes in terms of how much flowering and how much fruiting potential our hedges can have. And then for a while, we actually might just want to let our hedges go. We might just want to leave them for 5, 10, 15 years and let them get big and wild and floral and filled with birds and help them go, progress around that life cycle. But we can't do that forever, of course, because if we let our hedges go forever, they turn into tree lines. So the next step, I would say, is the absolute crucial one, and that's to lay our hedges. Now, hedge laying is, I would say, the most crucial step of any hedge management. And it essentially resets the dynamism, resets the succession of our hedge. We cut it right at the bottom, and then we force it to go through that whole succession again. And Welsh hedge laying has an incredibly rich history. I think in 1972, there were 16 different recognised traditional hedge laying styles in Wales. Each with their own unique way of rejuvenating Welsh hedges, each specific, developed in balance with different areas, different farming styles, and different, farming traditions in Wales. And what this does essentially, again, where you make that cut right at the very base, this is a pleaching cut on the left, and on the right is the regrowth from what you get at a pleaching cut. That regrowth represents the next generation of your hedge. So not only does it thicken your hedge up right from the bottom up, but actually this extends the life of your hedge and gives it another generation to stand there providing all it needs to do. So if you put all that together, this is what you get. This is the hedgerow management cycle or hedgerow life cycle. And basically, this is as simple as it needs to be. We just lay our hedges. We might trim them for a few years, either incrementally or rotationally. Then we might let them go for a little bit. We call it a period of non-intervention, and then we lay them again. And that's all it needs to be. And the laying is the crucial step to give that next generation. And what I love when I think about this is I love to think about how old our hedges are and to really realize how many hands have worked on them, how many times they've gone through this rejuvenation process to still be standing there today. Each one of our ancient hedges, and many of the hedges in Wales are very, very old, each one of them is only there because of the skills passed from farmer to farmer, generation to generation, to make sure that hedge has stayed alive. And anyone on this call that has laid a hedge knows that it's hard work. You know, it's enjoyable, but it's blood, sweat, and tears. And so this has been done for generations, generations, and generations. And I think it's testament to how important hedges have always been to our farming. Now, in Wales, you've got a few new groups popping up actually to support your wonderful traditional Welsh hedge laying. So you've got groups on Facebook that with the Welsh Hedge Laying Society, which have some fantastic resources showing the different styles, different competitions, different tools that are used, different shapes of billock. And I think it's absolutely wonderful to see this resurgence of interest in Welsh hedge laying and the traditions behind it. So again, I think hedge laying is essentially a superhero task, and most hedge layers I see as superheroes because what they're doing is they're taking something with a limited life cycle and giving it an extra lifeline. And this is how we've basically always done it. Unfortunately, when we stopped hedge laying, largely after the war, again for understandable reasons, hedges fell into one of two traps. They either run up into tree lines because we stopped managing them, or they turned into slightly over-managed hedges. We've got that sort of knuckle line at the trim line and a bit hollow at the bottom. Now, luckily, so this diagram here is based on the fantastic work of Nigel Adams from the National Hedge Laying Society, and it's the hedgerow life cycle based on his Adams code. And the garish pink boxes and purple arrows, again, I take a huge amount of optimism from, because essentially they say no matter where your hedge is on this life cycle, there is something that you can do to get them back into good condition. Now, what we're aiming for is to have plenty of hedges in that middle section, that dense and well managed. And all of the hedges that are flung off to one side or the other, we have to reclaim, basically through laying or through coppicing, and maybe a bit of gap planting and restocking. And that's going to be the task ahead of us. So hedges like this that have obviously been over trimmed for too long, that's likely going to need a coppice and a gap planting. Hedges like this, which are obviously struggling because they haven't been laid for a very long time, will also need either laying or coppicing and a lot of restocking and gap filling. I'll just scoot through some of these now. So in a nutshell, what we need when we're looking at hedgerow management is rejuvenation once per generation. That's your coppicing and that's your hedge laying. Once per generation, this is a non-negotiable. Without rejuvenation, hedgerows will ultimately fail and die. Now, what we do between rejuvenation is what we call routine management. And that's what we do between laying or between coppicing. Now, we've got loads of flexibility when it comes to this. We could do incremental trimming, we could do rotational trimming, or we could do non-intervention. And basically, as long as you're doing rejuvenation, so pick one type of rejuvenation from the left-hand column, then you can basically treat the right-hand column like a pick and mix to make your hedges suit your farm. There's a huge amount of flexibility within our hedge management to make sure that we can create hedges that actually work for the farm. So if you are going to lay your hedge and then trim them, then you can actually extend the period of time between you need to relay that hedge up to about 40 years. So the cycle length can be up to about 40 years. Now, if you're going to lay your hedge and then you're not going to trim it in the meantime, so this might be more geared towards hedges in the uplands, for example, where we still can't take a flail, let's be honest, then actually our hedges without the trimming whiz through that cycle a lot quicker. And we might actually need to lay them again in maybe 15 years instead, up to about 20 years, depending on how ambitious you are as a hedge layer. So again, understanding the different cycle lengths are implemented by the management, the routine management that we do to our hedges in between time. But again, a huge amount of flexibility to make sure that our hedges suit our farming and that we can manage them in a way that can benefit the farm and work for us. I will skip through a few of these because I realize I'm pushing it for time, but I would say one really important thing to be doing is to be planning what management we're going to do to our hedges. So I would say it's incredibly valuable to go out, have a look at your hedges and build them into a hedgerow management plan. Now, my favorite is, and what I love to champion, is to create a 10-year management plan. And basically do a survey of all of your hedges and work out which hedges you're going to rejuvenate, which ones you're going to lay, and how you're going to manage the other hedges, just to make sure that all of the hedges on your farm are in the right trajectory and that they're all going to get that rejuvenation within the time frame that they need them. And this can look really complicated. And this is something that I work alongside farming groups to actually help support farmers create these. But these hedgerow management plans then actually give you more flexibility in the long term to actually create a hedgerow system for your farm that actually suits your farm and that suits the hedges as well. So I've got a couple of slides on the sustainable farming scheme. I will rattle through these very quickly because I think Hywel's going to look at these as well. So I just wanted to show what support we can expect from the Welsh Government as part of the sustainable farming schemes. So of course we've got the universal layer, the optional layer, and the collaborative layer. Now for hedges, we only know so far what's in the universal and the optional layer, and I'll go through them very quickly. The universal layer, we've got the UA8, which is the hedgerow management layer. Now, in order to satisfy this, we have to trim our hedges incrementally, so higher and wider each year, with a minimum of 5 centimetres higher and wider. We do this until our hedges are 3 metres by 2 metres wide, or 2 by 3, whichever they get there first. And then we have a choice. We can either keep them there at 3 metres by 2 metres, or we can keep allowing them to get bigger. We also have to manage our hedges on a rotation, so we can't cut our hedges every single year, but at a maximum once every other year. And then, of course, we have to as always, only trim our hedges not in bird breeding season. So trimming our hedges only from September to the end of February. UA10 is the hedgerow and tree planting opportunity plan. So this is in the universal layer, and basically you need to make a map to understand where the opportunities for planting are on the farm. You don't have to do anything about this map within the first section of your agreement, but you have to create a map of showing where there are opportunities for more planting on your farm. I will skip through this. And then the optional actions. So this is fairly new, but we know that there's going to be optional actions for supporting hedgerow creation and restoration. So there will be money as capital grants, essentially, for planting new hedgerows, for rejuvenating hedges, so laying and coppicing, and also restoring, which is basically when you also gap plant and restock a hedge. There will also be money for fencing, gates, and for water troughs. So I would say make the most of the grants when they come out. Rejuvenation can reset hedges that have dropped out of their management cycle, and it can get them back into tip-top shape. We don't have to manage all of our hedges the same. We can look at our farm reassess what we've got and where it's going and create a management plan that actually works in different parts of the farm. So we might manage the lowland areas differently from the upland areas. We might manage the roadside ones differently, ones down by the soggy bits differently. But actually creating a plan can help you sort out those management practicalities. I would also say don't be disheartened. Hedges are incredibly robust. They're really resilient. They're wonderful, wonderful habitats. And they really do bounce back with a bit of effort. So I would say we are right to be optimistic when it comes to hedges. Wales has some of the best hedges in the world. I absolutely love coming to Wales and seeing them. And you've got 54,000 kilometres of managed hedge in Wales already. Each with a little bit of change to how we look at them can be doing so much more for our farming and so much more for the environment. So I think there's a huge amount of optimism to be got from them because so much can be achieved just by changing our approach to how we look at the hedges that we've already got. Again, hedges in Wales are the most species rich of any home nation. They should be absolutely cherished. Thank you very much. Apologies if I've slightly overrun
No,
there.
no, I apologize, Mike. Sorry for kind of limiting you to 45 minutes an hour. I could easily listen to you for another hour. That was yeah, really, really good comprehensive overview really of the benefits of hedgerows, not just for wildlife, carbon, water quality, water regulation, but also, from a farmer's point of view, as well. And speaking of a farmer's point of view. Nice little segue there. We'll hand over now to Hywel Morgan, who's the chair of the Nation Friendly Farming Network in Wales, to talk about the benefits of hedgerows on his farm. Ysgolheictid. Diolch Hywel.
Joel Chris, thank you, Megan, and bear with me. I'm not a tech geek, so I'm trying to start my slideshow. It doesn't give me the option for some reason. Um,
I think if you go to slideshow, maybe on that top column, you're on home now. If you go to the right, to a bit more, and then to the right to slideshow, you're almost
oh,
there.
yeah.
And
Right,
then
thank you.
that's it, yeah.
Right, yeah. Thank you, and brilliant. Megan has said pretty much everything I wanted to know. Anyway, I'm Hywel Morgan. I'm the chair of Nature Friendly Farming Network in Cymru. I'm a farmer. I farm and live in Myddfai, near Llandovery, in the western edge of the Brecon Beacons. Safety of a farm is an upland farm. There's a picture we here taken from hill, but it gives you an idea of our landscape. There's trees and lots of hedges. So Megan mentioned how diverse hedges is important, but for me, shelter is important on my farm. Huge important as a livestock farmer. Where there's sheep, and the reason I got this picture up is because I've tried 3 attempts to grow a hedge here. For some reason, I can't get the hedge established. So I think it's important, let's not worry about trying to grow a hedge everywhere. For sometimes, some reason, nature just won't let it happen. And here's a picture again of my diverse landscape and my livestock, and trees and hedges are part of my community. Livestock, they need shelter. Hot, sunny days and wet, windy days are important. I've changed my hedgerow management in the last, I don't know, 7 years, 10 years since Brexit. Sorry to mention that. I had a conversation with a Welsh government civil servant, and he asked, "How do I manage my hedgerows?" And I said, "Same as everybody else." Since then, I do rotational hedge cutting. But at the moment, I can't get the hedge cutting contractor to do as I want. So I'm growing my hedges taller, wilder, thicker, and out of control, messier hedges. And I feel like I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm glad we've got some funding from Welsh Government to help us manage our hedges. Cows, sheep, calves, etc., they love shelter, trees and hedges. Okay. And as you can see from this one, it's one of the fencing projects that's all on the list to do. But the cows do love hedges and head trees, not just for the shelter, biodiversity and browsing. And I do tend to allow the cows to do a lot of browsing. I'm going to skip through as quick as possible. I create wider biodiversity habitat corridors, and this used to be a couple of trees 10 years ago, double fenced it off thanks to a Glasgow Advance grant. And within a couple of years, the trees have flourished, they're growing, developing. There's a stream going down there that helps slow the flow as well. And that's a huge bonus. I've gone from indoor lambing to outdoor lambing, and most of my cows will calve outside as well, but shelter is important. This looks messy between the gate, the fence, the hedge it's just complete mess. This is my next project. I'm going to coppice it off. There's a couple of pictures of this. Coppice it off, back to ground zero, gap up the gaps, re-fence it, and all thanks to a government-funded grant. I always seem to think that the funding lags behind my work, but I am grateful that I do get some support and assistance. There's going to be a lot of work here, I've just invested in a tree shear to put on my digger, sort of thing, mini digger. So hopefully I can do most of the work myself, fence itself. My biggest challenge is the weather. And just in case that is a spaniel, not a beaver. And yeah, so I'm quite excited about this next stage. It's needed doing for a long time. The fence is basically non-existent, but the hedge is quite thick, quite dense, but it's growing tall and it's quite not as thick in the base as we want. But hopefully after coppicing, double fence it, it'll be about 4 meter gap between the two fences due to the water course as well, and I can't wait. This is one of the next projects as well, so I'm going to hedge lay this one. So which one I do first depends on the weather, depends on my energy. So I'm going to hedge lay this one and double fence it back. So this hedge, I can't remember when it was done last. My father was a keen hedge layer. He used to hedge lay about 200 meters every winter, create his own stakes, and fence it off. But he would normally try to reuse one of the old fence and put a new one the other side. But I'm going to hedge lay this myself this year. I'm done hedge laying for many years, since, to be honest, probably about 40 years since I was a child with Dad. But what's important, we have different styles of hedge laying. Carmarthenshire and Brecknockshire are slightly different, but the key thing is we do try and hedge laying. Let's not get too excited and too stressed out about what it looks like afterwards. Unless you hedge laying by a side of a main road when all your neighbours can see, that's when you have to do the prize job. But as long as you pleach it at the right angle, 45-degree, support it, and get that new growth from the base of a hedge, like Megan mentioned, then I'm sure in 5 years' time this will be fantastic. Even more, I think 2 years' time be fantastic. Unfortunately, this isn't a picture on my farm, but hedge laying is an art and skill, and it brings the old and the young together. And I think there's opportunity for young farmers to get some work done in the countryside. They might have to get off a tractor and hedge laying. once you get started, it is really exciting and rewarding. I'm also doing some tree planting at the moment. I haven't got pictures because it was so messy, wet and messy when we took the old fence off and had to copy some trees. And I thought it's not a good picture. Um, so this is one of my favorite hedge row examples. To the left, we got the conventional flailing every year, back just to top of a barbed wire post thing. And on the right, we've got this fantastic hedge, which was hedge laid probably about 15 years ago. Okay. But but because it's on the side of the road, it doesn't interfere with traffic. They do lightly trim the side, and but it's a fantastic example of hedgerow management compared with the other side. The only difference between the left side and the right side is was part of a duchy estate, was Prince Charles's farm, and he was a passionate hedge layer and hedgerow management. And the other farmer probably not as wealthy and as Prince Charles. Unfortunately, the hedgerow management of this estate has changed since Prince Charles became king. Now he's not involved with the duchy. There is a bit more hedge trimming. If anybody can afford to buy a post knocker and a mini digger, it's one of the best things I've ever bought, sort of thing. I can get on and do the work myself whenever, rain or shine, I can do it. I don't have to wait for the contractor to turn up because usually, they never turn up when you want to do. Unfortunately, I have to bust a gut and do it myself, but it is one of the most rewarding jobs ever. I've just bought some more attachments. I got a tree shear, a little grab, and another smaller post knocker as well. And it just makes the job easier. So, and I just get excited about hedgerow management. A lot of my neighbours think my hedges are messy and untidy. My contractor that comes and do the lane for me up to the farm, he's a bit wary of what I want to do. I just love taller, thicker hedges for biodiversity, nature, and a shelter for hot, sunny days and those cold, windy days. My nephew's a dairy farmer, and before I mention this, my nephew's a dairy farmer, and he said on a hot, sunny days, if his cows got shelter, the milk yield is greater. I graze cows on commons, and I'm thinking, should we be looking to be planting trees and hedges on commons for livestock shelter? Controversial topic, but my cows would love them. And these are just a few pictures of my cows grazing on the commons, etc. They carve up it, but they do love the shelter. And anyway, there's hedgerows if they're happy. And there's just a few facts about the benefits of on farm with hedgerows. Natural enemies. Hedgerow provides habitat and floral resources, etc. Economics. Hedgerows enhance native bees and natural enemies in adjacent crops that can benefit crop production. Weed control. Hedgerow plantings help out compete weedy vegetation that harbour pests and disease. Windbreaks, living fence lines, buffer zones, etc. Native breeze, biodiversity, soil water quality, carbon, and I think we can add air quality as well to that. And what I find in hedges and edges just excites me. These are some eggs I just found in a nest in close to a hedgerow. Different beetle. It's just exciting and fun just to let it go wild sometime. Orchards and hedges, it's just everything sort of integrates together. Megan mentioned the SFS. I put some figures together in the universal option layer and collaborative. There will be some sort of funding for hedgerow management. So as Megan said, in universal, we have to allow that hedge to grow 5 centimeters a year until it gets to 3 by 2 or 2 by 3. I'd like that to be 500 centimeters, sort of thing, not 5 centimeters or 50 centimeters. Let's grow them thicker and wider as quick as we can. Let's not hedge lay. The hedge lay in the SFS says every other year. Let's make them every 3, 4 years, sort of thing, and just utilize those skills like hedge laying and coppicing. These are some of the prices, I'm getting paid for my capital works in the small grants this winter. Hedge laying £9.73 a metre, which is okay, but it's not enough to pay the contractor to do it. I'm going to do it myself. If I can do 15 meters a day, I'll be chuffed. Copperson, that's pretty quickly done. That's probably the easiest way to make money, but you need the machinery to do it. Hedge planting is 6.16 a meter. I've just bought all the materials. I haven't had the bill, so I'm probably going to be a little bit out of pocket of that, but I'm going to do the work myself, which I get the pleasure and enjoyment and the well-being out of. Yeah, hedge planting was 6.16. The hedgerow fencing is £6.9. There'll be agroforestry, tree planting options, and there'll be CPD on hedgerow management in the universal action as well. There'll be CPD for hedge cutting contractors, I hope. I think the hedge cutting contractors need to understand the mechanism and the benefit of managing our hedge differently. Like I said at the beginning, we need a diverse hedgerow. We don't need every hedge to be the same. We need a rotational of some going to be copper, some going to be laid, new tree planting, hedgerow planting, etc. But different species love different type of hedges, and that's critical. We are quite fortunate. The SFS will replace the BPS, the capital grants, etc. We've already had. Utilize make your farm a bit more sustainable and resistant, and can create that wildlife and habitat and biodiversity corridors. And just to finish off for me, that's another picture on a nice sunny day. I think it was July, but you can see the amount of hedges and trees in a little bit of extra management, better management can make it a lot different. Thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr. I'll hand you back to Rhys.
Diolch, Hywel. Am gyflwyniad da. Thanks so much. Yeah, really feel your passion and enthusiasm for hedgerow management. And yeah, really nice of you to sort of kind of showcase what you're doing on the farm and kind of bring it to life. And I can feel and I kind of appreciate that the hedgerows and trees form a really kind of integral part of your kind of farming operation. Yeah. Out of interest, however, what do you call a hedge in Welsh? What words do you use?
We call it a perth or a berth, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know sometimes when you and me are talking rates, we don't understand each other because you call it a Greek, isn't it? Yeah, so
Yeah.
I can't remember. There's different terms in Wales for different heads,
I know,
depends
yeah.
where you are.
You can
Which is
probably,
interesting, isn't it?
yeah, it is. You could probably guess where someone is from by the word they use for hedge in Welsh. So yeah, I use gryth. You'll use perth. Some might use llwyn or cloud, and if you're in mid Wales, shetyn is the word. So it kind of there's links to our linguistic links, cultural heritage, and tradition and things like that, which is really cool as well. Right, we've got time for some questions. Thanks, Megan. I see you're answering or typing answers to some of the questions whilst we're going on, so that's great. I was just going to start off with the question, sort of, what do you think is the kind of single biggest barrier to well, A, having more hedges in the landscape, and B, to to achieving the most appropriate management, if you like. And is it one barrier, or is it kind of a mixture of quite a few? Megan, do you want to go first, and then we'll go to Hywel?
Yeah, happy to. Um, is it one barrier? It's interlinked barriers, I think. Um, the biggest barrier to good hedge condition is a lack of rejuvenation. The barrier to rejuvenation, unfortunately, is cost. It can be expensive because anyone that's done it knows that it's hard work and it's time and labor intensive. So it's expensive. So whether or not we've got a good enough support, I think is a barrier. So financial support from the government or financial support from anyone that wants to help financially support a better countryside and a more sustainable countryside. Um, that's probably and because of that, I would say another barrier, which is obviously interlinked as well, is we don't have enough hedge layers. We've got all of these hedges that need work, and we don't have enough professional hedge layers to do all of the hedges we need to do. So it would be my biggest recommendation is if you farm and you think you've got the time to lay a hedge per year, just one hedge per year, learn how to lay hedges. Preferably in your regional style, but as Hywel said, actually getting it down is important, whether it looks like a championship hedge or not is less important at this stage because we don't have enough professional hedge layers to get all the hedges done. If you lay your own hedges, you can still collect the government grants. I'll point that out as well. It's yeah.
On that note, yeah, we are planning a hedgerow management practical kind of laying course in Mid Wales in February. So keep an eye out on the NFFN website. Actually, join the NFFN for free to be first to hear about that event. Hywel, would you agree? Is it kind of the government?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Megan said. There's loads of barriers. Even the age of a farmer seems to get older, and his work ethic. It's easier to get the hedge cutting contractor to turn up with a tractor and manage the hedge. That's happened over the last 30 odd years. McConnell, just turned up with those easy, quick fix sort of thing. I think a lot of young farmers prefer to sit on a tractor than get out and get the billow out and the saw out and I know myself, once you once you start the job, it's a pleasure. But preparing the job is you got the weather against you, you got time constraints. But once you get into it, it's a pleasure, and it's really rewarding when you've done something yourself. Um, but there's multiple barriers, and I think with all the small grants that were applied for within Welsh Government, Glacier small grants or whatever lately, 50% was the only amount of grants that was awarded that actually went and got claimed. So there's a barrier there, and sometimes the financial barrier is enough of a barrier. If you can't afford the materials or somebody to do the work, it just prevents it. If you can't get a fencing contractor and a hedging contractor, that's an issue as well. And it's a mindset, isn't it? Just to me, seeing somebody flail a hedge, it looks like destruction. But to a lot of my neighbours, my friends, it feels like they're doing the right thing as well. So I think we need to press the reset button. And the why. Why is it important to look after the hedge? I think we all need to understand that.
I
Yeah.
completely agree with the once you get into it, it's fun. I would say it also comes with a bit of a warning because if you lay your first hedge, you've also got the pleasure not only of laying it but watching it regrow. And that's quite an addictive one because you'll also start seeing hedges everywhere. That once you know what hedge laying can do, you'll start seeing hedges everywhere that you'll be like, oh, that one needs to be laid, that one needs to be laid. And yeah, it comes with a warning. You'll see hedges everywhere.
I think make good point, Hywel, that these schemes are oversubscribed essentially. Kind of the appetite is there to either plant or manage, but the funding isn't. So, it's we should be putting more pressure on, on our respective kind of governments wherever we are in the UK, to make funding available, for farmers to do all this brilliant work. Right. There was a question. You've answered it kindly, Megan. But it was just around kind of what trees are the best to use in a hedgerow. Kind of, yeah, what we've used. Kind of, we are limited on our farm. If we're doing kind of schemes, we've done quite a scheme with the national park, so we're limited to what they can supply us. But kind of, it's mainly blackthorn, hawthorn, hazel, rowan, and dog rose. They're the kind of the common mixes. But yeah, what would you add to that, Megan? And kind of
I would
more nuance
say
than that, and just kind of
first things
put
first
these
is
in.
work out what you want your hedge for. Because if you want your hedge for wood fuel, then you're going to be putting different things in it for if you want your hedge for, I don't know, shelter or biodiversity. So work out what the primary reason that you're planting that hedge is, and then design a hedge that suits that. With that in mind, I would still say a mixed species hedge is better because I say it's a little bit more resilient and it's better for wildlife. So I think that the mix with the thorns is a good one. So have some good thorn in there, blackthorn, hawthorn, that's great. Have some hazel in there, that's really good if you come to lay your hedge or something because you get some stakes and some binders as well. And then once you've got like a thorny, woody base structure to it, go a bit wild. The more species the better, as long as you've got enough of the woody strong stuff. So that's the hawthorn, the blackthorn, even things like crabapple, because true crabapple is thorny and used to be used as part of the base hedge. And then top it up with other things. I mean, I love holly in a hedge. I think it's a wonderful addition to a hedge, especially if you're going to be putting it underneath a tree. So things like oaks will cast quite a deep shade, but if you've got holly underneath a tree around it, then the holly's quite happy sat underneath that shady canopy. Um, and yeah, other things like damsons, the fruiting thing. I'm a bit of a glutton, to be honest, and I love to forage in hedges. So I always take the chance to put some edible stuff in there. Things like damsons, I think are wonderful. And then, little bits and pieces of other stuff. So wayfaring tree, dogwood, maybe even a bit of spindle if it works in your area, and just top it up with a real mix of species. And then, as you said, something like a rose, some scramblers, so things like wild roses or honeysuckles to add that sort of kind of climbing, scrambling texture to it as well. So I think for me, a real mix, but yeah, primarily driven by what you actually want the hedge for and what its main purpose is. Because what we really want to be doing is creating hedges that are beneficial to the farm as well, and that has to be up there in the top of the priorities.
I just add to that. I totally agree with Megan, a diversity of plants, and I try to put a minimum of 7 different plants. But also look around the farm, what grows best, sort of thing. Try and replicate what's already there, but do be adventurous and plant different things. And there's some fruit and bearing hedgerows. And I must confess, we've done a lot of brandy and gin from different things I've been growing on hedges this year, which is absolutely delicious. And yeah, probably haven't done enough. So, but it's just amazing the diversity of what those hedges can give to you throughout the 12 months.
And what I would recommend as well, within that mixture, make sure, like, kind of, don't basically plant all your rowans in the first 5 meters and then all your hawthorns, then blackfords. Try and intermingle them within your sort of planting regime. I think it looks a bit
Absolutely,
better.
jumble them up because there's nothing you can do if you've got 10 meters of dogwood. You're not going to be able to lay that and make a decent hedge.
Yeah.
Mix them all up.
Um, there's loads of questions. We won't be able to go through each single one, but there is a really good question here. If we can keep our answers fairly short. If hedges have been around longer than fences, why do they need fences now? I thought that was a good question. Megan, do you want to have a stab at that?
Yeah, basically because we stopped laying them so frequently. So traditionally we'd lay our hedges much more frequently than we do now. When farms were smaller and when we had more labour on the farms, hedging and ditching was what we did every winter. Every farmer went out and hedged and ditched all through the winters. We've got, folk songs written about hedging and ditching. We've got books written about it. And hedges used to be laid, every 7 years in some places. So they were always stock-proof, and as soon as they stopped being stock-proof, we laid them again. But we don't have that now because we don't have the labour on the farms to lay them that frequently, nor the money to get the professionals in to lay them that frequently. So they're not as stock-proof as they used to be, which means we do need to be a bit more belt and braces and put the fences there too. And to be honest, there's lots of different things that actually feed into that conversation as well. There's loads of other small things that fit into that jigsaw, but to me, that's probably the biggest.
Just to add to that, Reese, I remember a farmer next door to me, the timber that he pulled out, he would put in as a secondary hedge to protect the main hedge. So, a lot of the thorns would go back in as a secondary hedge. And, there was more time sort of thing. Farmers were just working on the farm sort of thing. There was more staff, more labour. And then, all of a sudden, fencing materials became cheaper and easier sort of thing. And yeah, it just becomes a habit there.
Absolutely. Question, what should the gap be between hedgerow trees? I know the Welsh Government want at least one hedgerow tree per 50 meters of hedge, I believe. But like kind of what is there an ideal gap to have between
A
these?
mixture. I hate it when they're evenly spaced. Nothing in nature is even. Space them irregularly, I would say. And it depends what tree you're putting in there, let's be honest. Because if you're putting in an oak, that can be enormous. So if you're putting in a rowan as a hedgerow tree or a crab apple, then it's never going to get nearly as big, so you can put them further together. I also think, and I cut out this slide because I didn't have enough time, I'm afraid. But where you put your hedgerow trees makes a massive difference to what it does on the farm. So if you want shade, then put your big hedgerow trees in your east-west hedges where it casts shade onto the field. If you don't want shade in your field, that's where you put your small hedge trees. So your rowans, your crab apples, your damsons. So where you're putting them has a massive implication, and that's going to be the same for how many you put in. So in some places, it might be totally optimal to have lots of hedgerow trees in your hedge. And in other places, you might want to have fewer, maybe areas that are traditionally more open or areas that have got ground nesting birds or, I would say don't evenly space them, whatever you do. And then just have a look at your farm and think, where is a hedgerow tree going to be beneficial rather than in the way? Because again, we want to be building in habitats that are good for wildlife, but are also working with the farm. Because as soon as we put something in that actually doesn't work for you, then it's not going to be there for as long as it needs to be. So we need to be, making sure that we put them in the best places to positively impact the farm and the wildlife. And I don't think there's a set spacing for that, I'm afraid. Sorry, there's no straight answers in hedges, are there?
That's all.
I totally agree with Megan. Diversity, and don't have a monoculture, and don't stick to a number. Okay, just be brave, be bold, don't I?
Yeah. In the SFSs, that's an average, so it's average one for 50 meters. Yeah, I think the Natural England favourable condition report said 1 per 40 meters is optimal. But again, that depends on situation, species, all that sort of stuff. But the 1 per 50 meters is much more ambitious than we are in England. In our SFIs, we've got it 1 per 100 meters, which is, most of our farms already hit that, to be honest.
I'll just a couple more questions. There's one an observation here. Sort of kind of many farmers say that cutting to the knuckle every year, it's always been done this way. Clearly, it hasn't. So how do we kind of tackle this mindset, if you like? How do you want to take a stab at that? Sort of, what as a farmer, what made you kind of change your mind around management?
I think just Well, the crunch bit, I think, was when I was grazing on Swedes and forage crops in the winter, I didn't have enough shelter for my animals. So I thought I have to grow those hedges higher, thicker, sort of thing. And that was the crunch bit, the shelter bit. And, going from indoor lambing back to outdoor lambing, I just felt like I had to have a different variety of hedges. And, a diversity of hedges is a must, sort of thing. Some fields, you can have different height, different shapes, sort of thing, but just just be different, innit?
Um, I think the last what there's a question around when you're putting the fence, how far should it be from the center of the hedge? I guess it kind of it differs across each country depending on, well, if you're using a government support scheme, but any new hedge row that is created with Welsh government support needs to be well, double fenced at least 3 meters wide. So that's the new sort of prescription for fencing width in Wales anyway. Um, and then there's a question around is there any research into whether there are any health benefits for grazing animals that have access to be able to browse hedges? I will use this opportunity to plug our next webinar, which is on um, Wednesday, the 14th of January. It's at 7 p.m. So that's the exact topic that we'll be discussing. There's a webinar with Lindsay Wistons, who's basically going to talk about the benefits of agroforestry to animal health and welfare. So we'll park that question till then, if that's all right. I think we'll have to stop there if that's okay. I'm aware there are loads more questions to go through, but if you haven't answered your question, do send us an email. I will try and get you an answer as soon as possible. But this, yeah, as I said, this has been recorded. We'll share the slides with you. So if any of the questions have been answered in the slides and you missed it, then hopefully that will give you the answer that you're looking for. Just wanted to say a big diolch o galon, diolch yn fawr i Megan ag i Hywel. I think that's been a really, really cool, informative, and really passionate introduction, if you like, into the importance of hedgerows and how to manage them. I've certainly learned a lot. Thank you everyone for your questions as well. They've been really great. And yeah, sorry again for not being able to go through every single one. But yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn. And we'll call it a night there, and I guess we'll see you at the next one hopefully. So thank you very much. Nos da.